I stood at the entrance of the Grand Plaza Hotel, straightening my tie one last time. This was the day I had worked toward for 20 years. My son Ethan was getting married, and despite not being his biological father, I had raised him since he was 3. As a mechanic with only a high school diploma, I had faced many challenges raising him alone, but seeing him become a successful engineer made it all worthwhile. Then I saw it. My reception nameplate read, "Low-educated fake dad." My heart sank into my freshly polished shoes. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever felt judged for who you are rather than what you have accomplished. 20 years ago, my life changed forever. I was 25 working at an auto repair shop in Minneapolis when Jessica walked in with a beat-up Honda and a fussy toddler on her hip. The car needed significant repairs she could barely afford. Something about her determination caught my attention. She was juggling motherhood and 3 part-time jobs since Ethan was born. His biological father had disappeared the moment Jessica announced her pregnancy. I started finding reasons to check on them, bringing groceries when I knew she was stretched thin. We fell in love slowly. Jessica cautious about introducing another man into Ethan's life. But the little boy won my heart immediately, with his curious eyes and endless questions about engines and tools. "August, you explain things to him so well," Jessica would say, watching me show Ethan how to use a wrench properly sized for his tiny hands. After a year together, we moved into a small apartment. Those 2 years were the happiest of my life. I might not have had a college degree, but I was building something more valuable, a family. Then came the rainstorm that changed everything. Jessica was driving home from her night shift when a drunk driver crossed the median. She died instantly. Ethan was 3 years old. With no biological connection and no marriage certificate, I could have walked away. Many people expected me to. Instead, I fought through mountains of paperwork and legal barriers to adopt Ethan. I wanted him to know that family is not just about blood. "You are stuck with me now, buddy," I told him, the day the adoption was finalized. His small hand in mine felt like a promise I would spend my life keeping. Raising a child alone while working full-time was not easy. I picked up extra shifts and weekend work to afford a small house in a neighborhood with good schools. My boss Joe was understanding when I needed to leave to attend parent-teacher conferences or stay home with a sick child. "Education matters, Ethan," I would tell him every night before bed. "Your mom wanted that for you." I might have only completed high school, but I recognized the opportunities that education could provide. As Ethan grew, his intelligence shone brightly. He developed a passion for engineering that I encouraged by spending weekends taking apart and rebuilding engines with him in our garage. By high school, Ethan was taking advanced mathematics and science courses. His guidance counselor suggested applying to top engineering programs. "Dad, I got in." Full scholarship to Northwestern. Ethan announced his senior year, waving the acceptance letter. My eyes filled with tears. The kid who once handed me wrenches was heading to one of the best universities in the country. College was when Ethan met Sophia during a study group. She was also studying engineering, though, with a focus on biomedical applications. Their relationship developed quickly, and when Ethan brought her home during spring break of sophomore year, I could see he was serious about her. Sophia was polite but reserved during that first visit. She came from a different world. Her father, Harold, was a renowned cardiac surgeon, her mother, Margaret, a corporate attorney. They lived in a lakeside mansion in Chicago and vacationed in Europe every summer. "Your house is cozy," she commented clearly, searching for something positive to say about my modest 3-bedroom home with mismatched furniture. When I met her parents at Ethan's graduation ceremony 3 years later, the class differences became even more apparent. Harold barely shook my hand, looking past me to scan the crowd for more important connections. Margaret asked what I did, then quickly changed the subject when I mentioned my auto repair business. "Ethan mentioned you have been supportive," she said in a tone, suggesting support was the bare minimum expected. The engagement announcement 6 months later brought mixed emotions. I was thrilled for Ethan, but concerned about joining such different families. Harold and Margaret hosted an elaborate engagement party at their country club, I arrived in my best suit, which still looked out of place among the designer clothes. "August, we are so glad you could make it," Harold said loudly when I arrived, then promptly guided me toward the bar and away from his colleagues. Throughout the wedding planning, I was excluded from most decisions, but expected to contribute financially. When I offered to help with the rehearsal dinner, Margaret quickly interjected. "We have it handled, August. The club has very specific standards for their events," she explained, as if I might suggest having the dinner at a fast food restaurant. I tried connecting with them multiple times, offering to host a casual barbecue for the families to get to know each other better. Each suggestion was politely declined. As the wedding approached, the division between our families seemed to grow wider rather than narrower. "Dad, are you okay with all this?" Ethan asked one evening, noticing my quietness after another planning call where my input was dismissed. "As long as you are happy, I am happy," I assured him, not wanting to cast a shadow over his joy. The night before the wedding, I stayed up late polishing my shoes and making sure every detail of my outfit was perfect. I had saved for months to buy a new suit for the occasion. This was my son's big day, and regardless of how his new family viewed me, I was determined to hold my head high. The morning of the wedding arrived bright and clear. I woke up at 5:30, too nervous to sleep any longer. After a quick breakfast and triple checking that I had the wedding gift safely packed, I drove to the Grand Plaza Hotel where both the ceremony and reception would take place. The venue was intimidating with its marble floors and crystal chandeliers. Valets in crisp uniforms parked luxury cars as guests arrived in designer outfits. I handed my keys to a young attendant who looked somewhat surprised at my modest sedan. Dad Ethan called out, spotting me in the lobby. He looked handsome in his tuxedo, every inch the successful young professional he had become. "You look great." He hugged me tightly, and for a moment all my insecurities faded. This was my son, and nothing could diminish the bond we shared. "I am so proud of you," I whispered, patting his back. "Mr. Williams is here," I overheard someone say dismissively, and turned to see Margaret informing the wedding coordinator of my arrival. The coordinator glanced my way with a professional smile that did not reach her eyes. "The ceremony begins in an hour," she informed me. "Family is gathering in the Magnolia Room for photos." The Magnolia Room was filled with Sophia's extended family when I arrived. Conversations hushed briefly as I entered, then resumed with barely concealed glances my way. Harold approached with a glass of champagne. "August, good to see you." "Made it," he said, handing me the glass. "We are about to take family photos. You can wait until we call for Ethan's side." The pause before the word side spoke volumes. The photographer organized elaborate groupings of Sophia's family, grandparents, cousins, aunts, uncles, family friends. When it came time for my photos with Ethan, the session was brief and perfunctory. "Just a few quick ones," the photographer explained, checking his watch. "We are running behind schedule." The ceremony itself was beautiful. I sat alone in the front row on the groom's side, acutely aware of the contrast with the full rows on the bride's side. Walking down the aisle alone to my seat felt like a spotlight on my status as Ethan's only family representative. Watching Ethan stand tall at the altar waiting for his bride filled me with contradictory emotions, immense pride in the man he had become, and sadness that Jessica was not there to share this moment. When Sophia appeared in her elegant white gown, Ethan's face lit up in a way that made all my sacrifices worthwhile. "Who gives this woman in marriage?" the officiant asked. "Her mother and I do," Harold responded proudly, his voice confident and strong. The vows were exchanged, rings were placed on fingers, and my son was married. I blinked back tears, remembering the little boy who once asked me to check for monsters under his bed. The reception was held in the grand ballroom, decorated with thousands of white roses and twinkling lights. I followed the crowd, searching for my place card among the elegantly arranged table assignments in the foyer. That was when I saw it. My nameplate for the reception table read, "Low-educated fake dad." I stared at it, certain there must be some mistake. Picking it up, I turned it over in my hands as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less hurtful. "Quite accurate, would not you say?" came a voice behind me. I turned to find Harold with two of his friends, all slightly flushed from cocktail hour. "Is this some kind of joke?" I asked quietly, holding up the nameplate. "Oh, come now, August," Harold chuckled. "No need to be sensitive. Everyone knows you are not really Ethan's father." just a stand-in who did the basic maintenance until he could join the real world. His friends laughed, one of them adding, "At least they did not put oil change specialist on there." I placed the nameplate back down, struggling to maintain my composure. "Excuse me," I said, walking away before I said something I would regret. Finding my assigned table, I discovered I was seated far from the wedding party with Sophia's distant relatives who barely acknowledged my presence. From across the room, I could see Ethan and Sophia at the head table with her parents and grandparents. During dinner, I overheard Margaret explaining to the guests at a neighboring table, "No, August is not actually related to Ethan. His real father is. Well, not in the picture. August was just someone who happened to be dating his mother briefly before she passed. Just someone. 20 years of parenting reduced to just someone." Sophia seemed uncomfortable with her parents' behavior, but made no move to intervene. She glanced my way occasionally with apologetic eyes, but remained seated beside her father. The waiter serving our table, Thomas, noticed something was wrong. "Everything okay with your meal, sir?" he asked, bending down beside me. "The food is fine, thank you," I replied, barely touching the expensive steak on my plate. "First wedding in the family?" he asked conversationally. "Yes, my only son." Thomas glanced toward the head table, then back at me. "You should be up there," he said quietly, before moving on to serve the next guest. Toast time arrived, and Harold stood with practiced confidence. "Welcome everyone to this celebration of two exceptional young people joining exceptional families," he began. His speech emphasized the importance of proper family values and the achievements of successful people. He spoke about Ethan as if he were a fortunate charity case who had been rescued by his daughter's love. "Some might say background does not matter," Harold continued, swirling his champagne. "But we all know that excellence breeds excellence. Ethan has proven himself worthy of joining our family through his academic achievements and professional potential." Not once did Harold acknowledge my role in raising the man Ethan had become. When he concluded by asking the real influences in Ethan's life to stand for recognition, he pointedly looked toward Ethan's college professors and mentors, who were in attendance, deliberately excluding me. Laughter rippled through the guests on the bride's side. I stared at my water glass, contemplating whether I should quietly slip away. This was Ethan's day, and causing a scene would only make things worse for him. From across the room, I could see Ethan's face darkening as he watched the proceedings. He whispered something to Sophia, who glanced toward me with a troubled expression. Just as I was considering leaving, Ethan stood up abruptly and took the microphone from the best man who was about to speak. "I would like to say a few words," Ethan announced, his voice firm as the room fell silent. Every eye turned toward him, surprise evident on most faces. This was not on the meticulously planned reception schedule. When I think about who I am today, I think about the man who taught me everything important. I know Ethan began, his eyes finding mine across the crowded ballroom. Not just how an engine works, but how a man should live his life. He stepped away from the head table, moving to the center of the room. My dad, August, never missed a single school event. Not one. Even when he had been working 14-hour days fixing cars and came home with grease still under his fingernails that no amount of scrubbing could remove. He would shower, put on his one good shirt, and sit in those uncomfortable elementary school chairs to watch me receive perfect attendance certificates. The room had grown completely silent now. I could feel eyes shifting toward me, reassessing. When I was 12, I wanted to attend a summer science camp that cost more money than we could afford. Dad never told me that. Instead, he took on 3 jobs that summer. During the day, he worked at the garage. Evenings, he delivered pizzas. Weekends, he fixed neighbors' cars in our driveway. Ethan's voice grew stronger with each word. I did not learn about this until years later when Mrs. Patterson from down the street mentioned it. Dad never complained, never made me feel like I was a burden. I watched as Harold shifted uncomfortably in his seat, while Margaret stared down at her plate. Sophia was looking at Ethan with a mixture of pride and shame. I became an engineer because my father taught me to be curious about how things work. While some kids had fancy toys, I had something better, a dad who would let me take apart an old carburetor on the kitchen table and patiently help me put it back together. Ethan turned directly toward the head table, now his gaze steady. So when I see my father being disrespected, being seated far from his only child on the most important day of my life, when I hear that someone thought it was funny to label him as low-educated fake dad, I have to wonder what definition of education and family we are using. Gasps filled the room as Ethan revealed what had been written on my nameplate. Sophia stood up suddenly, her face flushed. "Ethan is right," she said, taking the microphone. "I have been silent too long about this. August should be at the head table with us. He is Ethan's father in every way that matters." Harold stood up, attempting damage control. Now. It was just a bit of harmless fun between gentlemen. "August knows we meant no offense." "No offense," Ethan repeated incredulously. "You deliberately excluded the most important person in my life from proper recognition. You seated him with people who do not even know him. Why? Because he fixes cars instead of hearts. Because his hands have motor oil under the nails instead of golf calluses." Harold glanced around at the watching guests, clearly uncomfortable with the public confrontation. "We wanted proper family at the head table," he said stiffly. "Tradition dictates certain arrangements." "Dad," Ethan said, turning to me, "let us fix this right now." He walked over to my table, extending his hand to me. The room watched in silent anticipation as I stood and followed my son. Ethan led me to the head table, removed the offensive nameplate that had been moved there, and replaced it with a napkin, on which he hastily wrote "Dad, who made me who I am." "This is where you belong," he said, firmly pulling out the chair between his and Sophia's seats. As I sat down, several guests began to applaud, including some from Sophia's side of the family. I noticed Sophia's younger sister Amanda smiling warmly at me from across the table. Thomas the waiter appeared almost immediately with a fresh plate of food, setting it before me with a respectful nod. "As I said, sir, you should be up here." Sophia leaned over and squeezed my hand. "I am so sorry, August. I should have stood up to them sooner. My parents have always been judgmental, but that is not who I want to be." Throughout the remainder of the reception, many of Ethan's friends made a point of coming to greet me, sharing stories about how Ethan had spoken of me throughout college. "He used to quote your advice all the time," one of his roommates told me, "about integrity being what you do when nobody is watching." Amanda, Sophia's 20-year-old sister, moved to sit beside me during the dessert course. "Ethan tells me you rebuilt a 1967 Mustang together," she said. "That is so much cooler than anything our dad ever did with us. It was always about appearances and achievements with him, never about actually doing things together." I could see Harold and Margaret huddled with relatives attempting to explain away the situation. Their efforts at damage control seemed half-hearted as the truth of their behavior had been publicly exposed. When it came time for the father-son dance, a tradition Ethan had insisted on, including the DJ, announced our names. As we stepped onto the dance floor, I felt a swell of emotion that nearly overwhelmed me. "Thank you, son," I said quietly as we moved awkwardly to the music. Neither of us was much of a dancer, for what Ethan asked. For being the kind of man who stands up for what is right even when it is difficult. Ethan smiled, his eyes suspiciously bright. "I learned that from you, Dad. You taught me by example every single day." As the song ended, Ethan addressed the gathered guests once more. "This man right here is the definition of a real father. Not because of biology, but because of choice. Every day he chose to be my dad when he could have walked away. That is what family truly means." The applause that followed felt like a vindication of everything I had tried to be for the past 20 years. The weeks after the wedding were a time of adjustment and healing. Ethan and Sophia returned from their honeymoon to a predictable tension between our families. But something had shifted permanently on that wedding day. 3 months after the ceremony, Sophia suggested starting a Sunday dinner tradition at my house. "Your place feels like a real home," she explained. "It has warmth that the house I grew up in never had." I taught myself to cook some fancier dishes for these occasions, wanting Sophia to feel welcome, but also staying true to my authentic self. The first Sunday, she arrived with an apron and asked me to teach her how to make my signature meatloaf. "My mother never cooked," she confided while mixing ingredients. "We always had staff for that. I never learned basic things that everyone should know." Those Sunday dinners became a cherished tradition. Sometimes Ethan's friends would join us. Occasionally, even Amanda would drive over from college to sit at my kitchen table and share stories about her classes. Harold and Margaret kept their distance initially. The humiliation of being exposed at the wedding had created a wall that seemed insurmountable. But 6 months after the wedding, Sophia convinced them to join us for dinner. Just one dinner, she pleaded with me. They are trying in their way. That evening was strained but civil. Harold commented on the vintage car parts catalog on my coffee table, making a stilted attempt at finding common ground. Ethan mentioned you restored cars together, he said awkwardly. That must have been educational. It was, I replied simply. Some lessons cannot be taught in classrooms. As the months passed, something unexpected happened. Sophia began asking me to show her basic car maintenance. I should know how to change a tire and check my oil, she insisted. These are practical skills my parents never valued. One Saturday afternoon, as I was showing her how to change brake pads, Harold unexpectedly stopped by. He stood awkwardly in my driveway watching us work. My father would have considered this beneath us, he commented, hands in his pockets. Manual labor was something other people did. That is a shame, I replied, handing Sophia a wrench. There is pride in knowing how to use your hands. To my surprise, Harold asked if he could watch. By the end of the afternoon, he had removed his expensive jacket, rolled up his sleeves, and learned how to check tire pressure properly. When the 1-year anniversary of the wedding approached, Harold called me. This was unprecedented. Our communication had always been through Ethan and Sophia. August, he began hesitantly. I was wondering if you might have some advice. About Sophia. She values your opinion, and I find myself struggling to connect with her the way you do. The conversation that followed was the first genuine exchange we had ever had. Harold spoke about growing up with a distant father who measured love in achievements and status symbols. I never knew another way to be, he admitted. But I see how Sophia responds to your approach, and I wonder if I have been wrong all these years. My healing journey was not instantaneous. The hurt from the wedding day had cut deep. But gradually I came to understand that Harold and Margaret were products of their own upbringing, just as I was of mine. Forgiveness came slowly, but it did come. Inspired by my experience, I started a weekend program at the garage where I worked teaching basic automotive skills to young people who might not be college-bound. Education comes in many forms, I would tell them. The world needs thinkers and doers both. The program grew more successful than I could have imagined. Some of my students went on to technical schools, others started their own repair businesses. A few even discovered a passion that led them to engineering programs, following a path similar to Ethan's. The most profound moment of reconciliation came when Ethan and Sophia announced they were expecting their first child. During a special Sunday dinner where they shared the news, they asked if I would help design and build the nursery. We want it to be practical and beautiful, Sophia explained. Not just for show, but actually functional for raising a child. Who better to help than the man who created such a wonderful home for Ethan? Later that evening, as everyone was leaving, Harold pulled me aside. I was wrong about you, August, he said quietly. Wrong about what makes a good father. Wrong about what kind of education matters most. I hope you can forgive my arrogance. I thought about the long journey that had brought us to this moment. The little boy I had raised was now going to be a father himself. The family that had once rejected me was now seeking my guidance. Blood does not make a father, I told Harold. Money does not make someone worthy. Education comes in many forms. What makes a family is showing up day after day with love that does not quit. As I prepare now to become a grandfather, I find myself reflecting on the most important lessons I want to pass down. Not just to my grandchild, but to anyone who feels judged for who they are rather than the degrees they hold or the wealth they possess. True worth is not measured by the job title on your business card or the neighborhood where you live. It is measured by the lives you touch, the love you give freely, and the integrity with which you face both triumph and adversity. I still have that makeshift nameplate Ethan created at the wedding, Dad who made me who I am. It sits on my workbench, a daily reminder that sometimes the most valuable titles cannot be earned through conventional means. They must be earned through consistent love day after day, year after year. Have you ever been judged unfairly based on your education or background? How did you handle it? Share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more real-life lessons. And if you know someone who might need to hear this message about what truly makes a parent, share this video with them. Remember, we all have wisdom to contribute, regardless of our formal credentials. Thank you for listening, and may you always know your true worth beyond any label others might try to assign to you.